Sir, she's here. The young hostess's voice trembled as she looked toward the Navy Admiral standing a few feet away. The Admiral turned immediately, his expression shifting from formal to deeply respectful. For a moment, the busy check-in area of the White House ceremony seemed to fall silent. The background chatter faded into a hushed anticipation. Beside me, my father, Richard Carter, was still standing, proudly holding his VIP guest invitation. Only seconds earlier, a smug smirk had been plastered across his face as he looked down at me. "You weren't invited, Emily," he had whispered, his tone dripping with the familiar condescension I had grown up with. "This is a high-level security event. You shouldn't be here." Now, that smirk was completely gone, replaced by utter confusion. The Admiral walked directly toward us. Not toward my father, who had proudly stepped forward to greet him, but toward me. Several military officers standing nearby suddenly straightened their posture, saluting as the Admiral approached. The Admiral extended his hand to me, a warm smile on his face. "Commander Emily Carter," he said warmly. "We've been waiting for you." My father blinked. I could almost hear the gears in his head grinding, his thoughts racing in a desperate attempt to make sense of the scene. Waiting for her, the daughter he had spent most of his life overlooking. The daughter he had always considered second best. The daughter he never expected anything from. I shook the Admiral's hand firmly. "Thank you, sir." "It's an honor to have you here tonight, Commander," the Admiral replied. And just like that, the memories I had spent decades trying to bury came rushing back. Because moments like this don't begin at the White House. They don't start under the grand chandeliers of Washington. They begin years earlier, in places nobody notices. In my case, it began in a small town in Virginia, a town with one stoplight, one grocery store, and one father who never wanted a daughter. At least, that was how it always felt. My name is Emily Carter. I am 38 years old, a commander in the United States Navy. For most of my life, I was completely invisible inside my own family. My father wasn't a cruel man, at least not in the way people usually imagine. He never raised his hand to me. He never abandoned us. He worked hard, paid the bills, and showed up every day. From the outside, he looked like the perfect, dedicated family man. The real problem was what happened inside the house, especially after my younger brother, Michael, was born. Dad absolutely adored Michael. Everything changed when that little boy arrived. I saw it in the way Dad looked at him, the way he spoke about him, and the way his entire face lit up whenever Michael entered a room. Even as a little girl, I noticed the difference. Children always notice. Adults think they are hiding their favoritism, but they aren't. I remember bringing home a perfect spelling test in the 3rd grade. I was so excited. I ran into the kitchen, holding the paper up like a trophy. "Dad, look. I got 100%. He glanced at the paper for maybe 2 seconds. "Good job, Emily." Then, he immediately turned back to my brother. "How was baseball practice, buddy? Did you hit any home runs today?" That was it. No celebration, no pride, no conversation. Just a cold good job before shifting his entire focus back to Michael. I stood there holding the paper, waiting for something more, but nothing else came. Years later, I would realize that moment wasn't unusual. It was our normal. The wall in our living room told the story better than words ever could. Michael's baseball trophies covered the shelves. His photographs filled the frames. His certificates hung proudly where every visitor could see them. There wasn't a single picture of my accomplishments on that wall. Not one. When relatives visited, Dad would proudly walk them through Michael's achievements. "Here's my future star athlete," he'd say with a massive grin. Meanwhile, I would be standing 3 feet away, and nobody would even ask how I was doing. At first, I thought maybe I wasn't trying hard enough. I believed that if I earned better grades, worked harder, and achieved something extraordinary, Dad would finally see me. Children are funny that way, they almost always blame themselves for their parents' emotional distance. The only person who seemed to understand my pain was my mother, Sarah Carter. She had the gentlest voice I've ever heard. She wasn't loud or dramatic, but she always knew exactly what I needed. One evening, after another baseball game where Dad spent the entire drive home praising Michael, I sat quietly in my room. I was 12 years old enough to understand disappointment, but young enough to still hope things might change. Mom knocked softly on my door. "Can I come in, Emily?" I nodded, wiping my face. She sat beside me on the bed. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. Then, she reached over and tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear. "You're hurting," she said. It wasn't a question, it was a fact. I stared at the floor, fighting back the tears. "I'm fine." She smiled gently. "No, you're not." The tears came immediately. I hated crying, but Mom always saw right through me. "He doesn't care about anything I do," I whispered. She stayed quiet, carefully choosing her words. Finally, she said, "Your father loves you, Emily. But sometimes people carry old, rigid ideas they don't know how to let go of. He thinks sons and daughters are different." "They are different," I laughed bitterly. "Not in the ways that matter," she said softly, taking my hand. "Listen to me, Emily. One day, you will show them who you really are." I remember rolling my eyes back then. It sounded like the kind of empty encouragement mothers write on greeting cards. But she squeezed my hand firmly, and for the first time I realized she truly believed it. She didn't just hope, she believed. Years passed, and the gap between Michael and me grew even wider. Dad spent thousands of dollars helping Michael chase his sports dreams, travel teams, expensive equipment, private coaching, whatever he wanted. The money always appeared. But when I needed basic things for school or my own interests, the answer was always the same: "We can't afford it, Emily." At 14, I started babysitting. By 15, I worked weekends at a local diner. By 16, I was buying most of my own school supplies and clothes. I never complained out loud, but deep down, I always wondered what it felt like to be chosen, to walk into a room and know that you actually mattered to your father. Then, life delivered the hardest blow of all. Mom got sick. At first, she tried to hide it, but eventually, she couldn't. Doctor visits became hospital visits, and treatments became long, terrifying stretches of fear. I watched the strongest, gentlest person I knew grow weaker by the day. And no matter how hard I prayed, I couldn't stop it. One evening, sitting beside her hospital bed, Mom reached for my hand. Her grip was much weaker than before, but her eyes were steady and filled with certainty. "Promise me something, Emily," she whispered. "What, Mom?" I asked, trying to hold back my tears. "Never let anyone else decide what you are worth." "I promise," I wept. She smiled, the same beautiful smile that had carried me through every lonely dinner table and silent disappointment. Then, she whispered the words that would follow me for the rest of my life: "One day, they'll see who you really are." At the time, I thought she meant my father. I thought she meant my family. I didn't understand that she was talking about a destiny much bigger than our small house in Virginia. Mom passed away 3 months before my high school graduation. I was 17. At that age, you're old enough to understand death, but not old enough to know how to live without the one person who truly loved you. The morning of her funeral, our house was suffocatingly quiet. After she was gone, Dad buried himself in work, Michael buried himself in sports, and I buried myself in my books. The house felt freezing without Mom. She had been the bridge between everyone, the one who softened Dad's harsh words and remembered birthdays. Without her, the division in our family became an unbridgeable chasm. A month after her death, I was cleaning out an old cedar chest in her room and found a letter addressed to me. My hand shook as I opened the envelope, which still carried the faint scent of her perfume. The note was short, but one sentence changed my life forever: "Never let someone else's opinion become your destiny." I read those words over and over, letting them sink deep into my soul. At graduation, the seat beside Dad was empty. Relatives crowded around Michael, congratulating him on his latest baseball game. Few people asked about my future. Dad had already made it clear that the family's resources were going toward Michael's athletic career. My college ambitions were considered optional. One evening, I was filling out scholarship applications at the kitchen table. Dad walked past, glancing at the stacks of paperwork. "What are those?" "Scholarship applications," I replied. He shrugged. "Well, that's probably your only chance." It wasn't cruel, it was just a matter of fact. For a second, I wanted to fold the papers and quit. But I remembered Mom's letter, and I kept writing. I applied for every grant, scholarship, and academic aid program available. Months later, the acceptance letters started arriving. I secured enough financial aid to attend college entirely on my own. College was a cycle of endless work. While other students socialized, I worked 3 jobs: waitressing, tutoring, and stocking shelves. I learned how to survive on nothing, how to handle setbacks, and how to keep going when nobody was cheering for me. That became my secret advantage. Most people work hard when they have support. I learned how to work hard when I had absolutely no one. During my second year of college, Michael suffered a career-ending shoulder injury. His baseball dreams vanished in an instant. For the first time, I saw fear in my father's eyes, not for me, but for Michael. The single vision he had invested his entire life in was collapsing, and he became angry and restless. Meanwhile, I was quietly building a future they never saw coming. Shortly after my college graduation, I walked into a Navy recruiting office in a strip mall. I wasn't looking for adventure, I was looking for a place where my results would speak louder than my gender or my family's neglect. The recruiter asked me, "What are you hoping to accomplish, young lady?" "I want to earn something that nobody can ever take away from me," I answered. I took the oath and entered the Navy. Dad didn't attend the ceremony. He said he was too busy helping Michael figure out his next steps. Naval officer training was brutal, but I loved it. The Navy didn't care about my childhood or my father's favoritism. It only demanded performance. Work hard, lead, and execute the mission. For the first time, the rules were fair. Of course, some men looked at a young female officer and assumed I wouldn't last. But I didn't waste time arguing. Performance was the only argument that mattered. When others slept, I studied. When others complained, I prepared. Slowly, the promotions came. The commanders who had ignored me started paying attention. I called Dad to share the news of my first promotion. There was a long pause on the line. "That's nice, Emily," he said, using the exact same tone he had used on my spelling test 20 years earlier. Then, he shifted the conversation to Michael's new business idea. I didn't get angry. I simply understood. Parents are flawed human beings with their own blind spots. Expecting a miracle from someone who doesn't know how to give it is a recipe for endless heartbreak. As the years passed, Michael bounced from one failed business venture to another, constantly draining Dad's savings. Dad bailed him out every single time, while I moved across the country, serving on deployments and taking on massive command responsibilities. I eventually became a commander, leading critical logistics and humanitarian operations. During a massive natural disaster overseas, my unit coordinated the rescue and relief of thousands of displaced families, working 72 hours straight without sleep. I didn't know it at the time, but my leadership during that operation resulted in a nomination for a national military recognition. One evening, I came home to find a large, formal envelope from Washington, D.C., in my mailbox. I opened it, expecting routine paperwork, but my heart stopped when I saw the gold emblem of the White House. I had been selected to receive a national leadership honor, presented by the Joint Chiefs of Staff at the White House. I stared at the paper, then looked at a framed photo of my mother on my counter. "Mom," I whispered, "they finally noticed." The next day, I called Dad. I didn't want to boast, but I felt he should know. "I received an invitation to the White House, Dad," I said. "The White House?" His tone changed instantly. For the first time in my life, he sounded genuinely impressed. Well, that's really something. Do they allow family to attend? Yes, I said. A week later, I drove to Virginia to pick him and Michael up. The old house looked smaller than I remembered. Dad looked older, his hair gray, his movements slow. Growing old humbles everyone, even distant fathers. During the flight to Washington, Dad proudly told strangers at the airport about the White House event. He accepted their congratulations as if he were the one being honored, and I let him. I had realized that life is much easier when you stop demanding perfection from people. The morning of the ceremony, the White House grounds were breathtaking. We joined the long queue of distinguished guests, generals, and diplomats. Dad adjusted his tie, holding his VIP guest pass like a trophy. As we approached the security desk, Dad looked at me and smirked. "You weren't invited, Emily. Are you sure you're allowed in this line?" The words didn't hurt anymore. The sting was gone. I simply handed my security card to the young hostess at the desk. She scanned the barcode, and her smile instantly vanished. She looked at the screen, then looked up at my uniform, her eyes wide. She immediately turned to the senior Navy admiral standing a few feet away. "Sir, she's here," the hostess whispered, her voice trembling. The admiral turned, his face lighting up. He walked directly toward me, bypassing my father who had stepped forward with an open hand. The admiral stood at attention and saluted me. "Commander Emily Carter," the admiral said. "We've been waiting for you. It is an honor to have you here tonight." My father stood frozen, his hand still extended in the air. He looked at the admiral, then at me, completely speechless. The admiral turned to him. "You must be Emily's father. You should be extremely proud. Your daughter's leadership saved hundreds of lives during the disaster relief operation." My father opened his mouth, but no words came out. An usher escorted us into the grand ceremony hall. She led us past the general guest seating, right to the front row, the honoree section. "Commander Carter, please take your seat here," the usher said. Dad stopped, staring at the stage. "What is this, Emily? Why are we sitting here?" "I'm not just attending the ceremony, Dad," I said softly. "The ceremony is for me." His eyes widened as the reality finally crashed down on him. During the presentation, my name was read aloud, and the entire room stood up to applaud. I walked onto the stage, the medal heavy against my chest, and looked out at the crowd. I saw my father. He wasn't just clapping, he was weeping. After the ceremony, we walked through the quiet gardens of the White House. The afternoon sun cast long, warm shadows across the grass. Dad stopped by a bench, staring at the ground. "I didn't know, Emily," he said, his voice trembling. "I didn't know any of it." "I know, Dad," I said gently. "I owe you an apology," he said, tears filling his eyes. "I spent my whole life waiting for Michael to accomplish something great, and I completely missed who you already were. I remember your spelling test in the 3rd grade. I knew I disappointed you, but I was too stubborn to admit it. I should have listened to your mother. She always told me you were capable of great things." Hearing my mother's words from his mouth took my breath away. "I can't get those years back," he wept. "But can we move forward?" I looked at him, the man who had failed me, but who was finally trying to see me. I smiled gently. "Yes, Dad. We can." A few weeks later, we went to visit my mother's grave. We carried a bouquet of her favorite white flowers. Dad reached into his pocket and pulled out the official White House ceremony program. He placed it gently on the headstone. He looked down at the grave, his voice shaking. "You were right, Sarah. She did it." Standing there, I finally understood what Mom had wanted me to know. The award wasn't the victory. The White House wasn't the victory. The real victory was becoming a strong, capable woman without letting the pain of the past make me bitter. The real victory was finding the grace to forgive. Never let someone else's opinion become your destiny. The people who underestimate you do not get to define you. Build a beautiful life anyway. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched your heart, please leave the word destiny in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you on the next journey.